OK. Monsieur Henry, de la Chambre de commerce.
Mr. Henry now. You have 5 minutes from the Chamber of Commerce of Canada.
Here before the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee to share comments on Bill C-12. So thank you for the invitation. For those I've not met, my name is Aaron Henry. I'm the Senior Director of Natural Resources and Sustainable Growth at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. The Canadian Chamber represents over 250,000 businesses through our network. I'd like to start by simply saying, in principle, the Canadian Chamber is supportive of Bill C-12. However, we believe that there are some details within the legislation as it's proposed, as well as mechanisms of execution that could probably benefit from greater clarity and also some improvements to greater strengthen the confidence of Canada's business community in the Act. I would actually like, though, to start simply with what we see as the potential value of Bill C-12. And I think in many respects, it dovetails some of the comments from the other speakers today. If developed well and in consultation with Canada's business community, I think this bill could lend to greater policy certainty in Canada. I think it create stronger and mutual trust among government, business, and Canadians in the pursuit of our efforts to decarbonize. And as many other speakers in this committee have noted on other days, we have a history of setting climate goals and failing to meet them. Not only does this undermine our efforts to meaningfully contribute to global efforts to combat climate change, it poses a risk to Canada's leadership on the global stage and reputation. And it also, from the business perspective, creates a risk for paradigm swings in Canada's policy environment. And this takes place as successive governments introduce new measures and more stringent regulations to close ground on lapse targets. And that in itself creates uncertainty for an investment environment. It makes it harder for businesses to adapt and cope, and then thankfully to know where they stand. And that in turn creates additional financial and political risk for Canadian businesses. As such, in principle, legislation that increases the transparency and accountability in our efforts to achieve net zero has significant value, especially given that we are discussing policy choices that take shape over the span of decades. With that said, the Chamber recognizes the value in making a few improvements or changes to the legislation. I think first is that we acknowledge that climate change has many different dimensions to it. How we approach net zero will have consequences that go beyond simply reducing emissions. There are implications for social inclusion. There are implications for Canada's economic prosperity and labor forces, implications for rural communities, and as some of the witnesses who attended yesterday will attest, even public health dimensions. In short, not all the pathways to net zero are created equal. Some pathways will carry higher trade-offs than others. Some of them will achieve the desired environmental outcomes, but at the unnecessary expense of other social and economic factors. So while the goal of reducing emissions falls squarely within the remit of Environment and Climate Change Canada, those other dimensions, I think, demand the attention of other ministers whom those issues fall within their portfolios. And for that reason, we'd like to make the suggestion that rather than the minister approving a 5-year plan, that should actually be a governor in council decision and made with cabinet. At the same time, we are concerned that, as described, this legislation doesn't really give full consideration to the economic opportunities and consequences that are attendant to pursuing net zero. The goal of developing sectoral decarbonization strategies has the potential to create closer collaboration between government and industry to ensure greater policy certainty. But there are two gaps currently that I think need to be closed to achieve this. One, there needs to be a clear economic lens built into the legislation. This lens should set perimeters to ensure that the sectoral strategies developed by the proposed advisory body adhere to those parameters, such as economic competitiveness, job creation, the international opportunities for emission reductions, and the potential export advantages in commodities and clean technologies that Canada can leverage. At a minimum, there needs to be an economic lens that makes that criteria through which different sectoral decarbonization strategies are selected transparent and clear for all concerned stakeholders. Second, we feel that a very high task has been placed before the Net Zero Advisory Board. Simply that having sort of 15 people to successfully develop decarbonization plans for multiple economic sectors over multiple years is a big challenge. And I think that challenge seems even greater given the absence of the direct inclusion on the advisory board or through other mechanisms within the Act of industry expertise in developing these sectoral strategies. So our recommendation would be that the legislation be amended to ensure that industry stakeholders, the stakeholders who are closest to the technological and business opportunities to lower emissions for their sector, are given a clear and formal role in developing sectoral decarbonization strategies. Last, we do have some concerns with the scope of the legislation. It's already been raised. Exactly how this legislation will interact with provincial jurisdictions and the climate ambitions set by provincial governments. It would be helpful if there were some amendments that would clarify how the targets set by provinces will be integrated into this act. That'll be critical in collaborating offset policy, carbon credit creation, and it'll be very important to ensure greater technological certainty around technologies that are eligible for offset creation and pass the test of additionality. Without strong coordination.
Merci beaucoup.